Thank you very much, Brett. It's always good to be here at PRONI. It is such a brilliant institution, and there's many a days I've pored over maps and over records in my research. One of the things that, of course, there's a Hartley theory of history, and it is that you always find what you're not looking for, and you always go where you're not meant to go. And in that sense, people often think of burial grounds as just for those who are buried there, but of course the narrative of a burial ground is about location, who owned the land. It's about symbolism, architecture. There's so many different avenues of research that emerges just the minute you enter or go through the gate of a burial ground. So where I start today is, and in a sense when I started to look at my first burial ground, the city cemetery, I inadvertently began an interest in maps. And so this is a map the first Ordnance survey map in Ireland in the 1830s. And what it shows here is the Falls Road, and this is the Falls Road here. Now, when you look at this map, you're looking really at a very ancient landscape. And so you'll see here, for instance, this is an Iron Age fort. I have a photograph of this Iron Age fort in 1967, and another photograph, an aerial photograph of it, taken in 1972, and what's sitting on top of it but a British Army fort. So it seems to me, this connection. So this is the Falls Road, you're coming up the falls. This is the lunatic asylum. I like to say this is where my grandparents met, but not as intimate. So this would be St Dominic's over here. You'll notice this becomes the Balmoral Road, but there's no Springfield Road. The Springfield Road today would come up, and this is Springfield Dam and round and across the top. Over here, most people don't know it, this would be Clarence Street today, and you'll see another fort here, and that fort that sits where Clonard Monastery, the Redemptorist Church, sits today. And if you look here, when I say there's another fort there, you'll see, look at them over here, then you'll see one over here. So this is really an ancient landscape. So you're coming up, this is Beachmount House, this is an Irish Language School today, and you're coming up towards the White Rock Road here. You'll notice there's no Donegal Road. Over here you have the Lisburn Road, but you'll notice there's no railway line. And so this is the site that becomes the Belfast City Cemetery. And the story of Milltown Cemetery is you can see it there, is in the 1850s. So you can see that it's more built up. I was talking earlier on about Blackstaff Way. This is where the junction, where it was flooded a few years ago in the underpass. This is it here. So this is the ground that becomes the city cemetery. So this is the Reverend Dr. Patrick Dorian, Bishop of Down and Connor. He is really a dynamic figure brought into Belfast, and he really transforms Belfast. He's very bulshy, and he starts to build schools. He brings in orders of nuns and brothers, and you see then a growth of parishes and congregations in Belfast. Now, in 1869, Belfast Corporation decided that they would open a new burial ground. It was before that, but in 1866 they bought 100 acres of land off the Sinclair family in Turf Lodge, and they decided to use 44 of those acres. Sorry,
Tom, can you move away from the speaker? We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's, yeah, but when you move away to the screen, we can't hear you.
So was somebody complaining. Anyway, so that's the first time I've ever been told somebody can't hear me. So Bishop Dorian, in 1866, the corporation bought 100 acres of land, as I said, and started to build their burial ground. And they opened that burial ground on the 1st of August 1869. It was meant to be interdenominational, and the burial ground was meant to be for Protestants and Catholics, and later on the Jewish community got a bit of land. But early 1869, Bishop Dorian got into a dispute with the the Belfast Corporation. And what was the dispute about? The dispute about who had the ultimate burial rights for those to be buried in the Catholic ground, Catholic blessed ground. And this is the section here. And you'll notice there's a dividing line here. And this is an underground wall which was meant to separate out the Protestants from the Catholics. And the dispute raised through 1869. And what was it about? A stillborn child would not be buried in Catholic blessed ground. In other words, someone who had committed suicide, or indeed someone who had been excommunicated. And the last category I was talking about to a crowd like this one day, and I said, I'm a Catholic who bought a grave as a Catholic, but then became a Protestant. And as I got to that point, a voice at the back went, God forbid. Would not be buried in Catholic blessed ground. And so the dispute raged on, and it's hard to believe, but this is a photograph of the underground wall, still there to this day. It runs to the depth of a grave in this section, and the whole length of this section. And what then happened was that the bishop and the corporation came to an accommodation. So the bishop got £4,000 compensation, and the corporation, as the burial board, were relieved of their responsibility of burying the Catholics of Belfast. Now, I suspect that the old bishop had all this planned out, because in March 1869 he held a meeting in St Mary's Hall, and he talks about, well, if we're not going to get a resolution of this problem, we start thinking of buying our own burial ground. So the city cemetery opened on the 1st of August 1869. And the bishop then started to buy 2 pieces of land on the Falls Road. This is from James Ross, and the sale was completed on the 12th of October 1869. And then from James Greer Bell, now this was completed on the 22nd of November 1869. So here's the Falls Road. This lane is still here to this day. And this was Milltown House and its gardens. And so the 2 pieces of land were about 15 acres in total. So the cemetery opened on the 25th of November 1869. However, and we'll talk about this, the very first burial took place on the 17th of November 1869. And it is not recorded, but I'll come to that in a few minutes' time. So the cemetery then opened on the 25th of November 1869. And it was very difficult in terms of research of, it wasn't bought as one piece of property. So you've got 22nd, 11th, 1869, 12th, 10th, 1869. Then this section was bought in 1906. Then this section bought in 1928. This section bought in 1933. And this section bought. The last section was a deal done with the corporation and the bishop, or the trustees, when land owned by the trustees, which we know as Bog Meadows, was swapped with Belfast Corporation as land for the motorway. And then they got this land, and also a piece of land over here on the Falls Road, which St Weese's school is built on. Now, about 1901, what they then do is they create a notional line. So up until about 1901, there was one form of registration. But then in 1901, they created one line. And this is a notional line. So over here is, all this is A and all this is B. But the odd thing about the cemetery, so the graves are characterized in terms of the alphabet. And normally you would think, well, the first row would start as A, and then B, and then when it goes out of there, it goes down to AA and AB and AC. But in fact, this is over AA here, and up here they start with A. And I suspect that the bishop had his eye on this land long before he actually bought it. So it's quite higgledy-piggledy when you have to try and understand the way graves are registered. So here you've got the row number, then you've got a grave number, and then which section. So there's section A and section B. But really, it's taken an enigma machine sometime to figure out how the burials are registered. So I just give you this sense because this is only one section. So this is a section at the top of the original cemetery, but what it really tells you is grave on grave. So if you're talking Catholics today, really often you hear them going on about how if you're burying in this section, then you have to walk over graves to get to a grave. And it's not only difficult, but it's also highly dangerous, you know, with surrounds. Although some of the sections have passed, but this gives you a sense of what a section and the density of the graves. And this is only one section. This is what the cemetery looks like today. And you can see this is the entrance here, and you're coming down. This is the poor ground. So the original cemetery was, this is the original cemetery here. Over here you would have the Republican plot. Over here you've got the war memorial, the cross of sacrifice, and these are sections of poor ground, and then there's poor ground down at the bottom. The poor are always buried at the back, out of sight and out of mind. So this is what it looked like in 1967, and you can see this is a new motorway. We would know this today as Boucher Road, and so you've got, this is poor ground here in these sections, and then at the bottom there's poor ground. Now, over here is the line of the original cemetery, but in the 1970s and 80s, this land, some of this land was given to the Ulster Wildlife Trust, maybe a bit later, and there was a real, because some of the land given was burial ground, and there was a campaign later on, particularly because it's poor ground, and particularly because there are many babies buried in these plots. There was a campaign to get this land back as a cemetery. Over here, this is the new part in the 1960s. And so this is what it looked like in 1967. So the very first burial, this is Father Clark from St Mary's, and he had a very severe form of typhus, and he was administrator of St Mary's in Chapel Lane, and he died on the 15th of November 1869. And he was buried on the 17th of November 1869. But of course, the burial isn't registered, but he is the very first burial to take place in the cemetery. And this cross, I suppose we would call this a scriptural cross because it carries scenes from the Old Testament. Of course, at the top you can see a representation of the Holy Spirit and an angel, and then the crucified Christ. And so this is Melchizedek and Lot. Lot was kidnapped and was rescued by Abraham, and so this, and he was then brought back and given a glass of wine. So there you have the old wine jug. This is Abraham and Isaac, and you can see the dagger up here. The God tested Abraham and said, you know, he wanted him to sacrifice his son. Then an angel was sent to stop him. So this is Abraham and Isaac, and this is the Cain and Abel. So these are the panels that you find on this cross. This cross was made in London. This is the gateway of the cemetery. It was raised shortly after it was opened. And the Latin here is, I am the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Amen. So it is taken from, I think, the last line in the credo. And what you notice here, this rough cut stone, so these were meant to be angels, and there was meant to be a religious scene here. It was never, this gate has never been completed. So many people who go under it today don't realise, you know, that, as I said, the stones of this gate are still incomplete. This is what the cemetery looked like a few years ago. And here, as I said, you can see here, this is the original line of the cemetery. And this is the plan given to the Ulster Wildlife. Now this is all back with the cemetery after a campaign by local women. But what you notice, and there are quite some horrendous elements of the history of this cemetery. So this is poor ground. So what they did, they built a car park here, and then they built another car park. So this was car park built over poor ground, burial ground. And here, what you see, this is original poor ground, and here you'll see headstones. And these were stones sold, I think, in the 1970s to families. So this was poor ground, and you might have sometimes 5 and 6 people in a poor grave. And they sold graves which were originally poor ground. You can see that here. This is the old St Patrick's Boys' Home, opened shortly after the cemetery. And you can see this is as you're coming down the main thoroughfare here. This is the War Cross, the Cross of Sacrifice. You're coming up Republican Plots here, Republican Plots there. So this is what the cemetery looked like in 2012. So this is Edward Hughes, the son of Barney Hughes. He was sent off to Canada, but then came back. He's responsible. He was the managing director of Barney Hughes, who used to make their famous bombs. So he opened. They had a building in Divis Street, and he opened that. And then they moved to the Springfield Road. So this is his stone. His father is buried in Friars Bush. This is Matthew Bowen. And Matthew owned the Royal Hotel in the centre of Belfast. And he this is a very elaborate piece of stonework. You can't see it so well here, but if you're ever in the burial ground, look at the hands on the hinges, because some will be clasped, some will be joined. And it's really, it's really in a bad state now, but it must have been something quite amazing when it was first built. And he owned, as I said, the Royal Hotel, Donegal Square. This is the White Linen Hall, and this is his hotel. When he died, he left his a substantial amount to these sisters in Sussex Place. Where there was a school off May Street. He built that school. This is a man called Bert, and he was a shipping agent. And this stone was made in Paris and brought to the cemetery. I really think it is, it's a piece of beautiful funerary architecture, but it's also, I think, a beautiful piece of artwork. And what really amazes me about when you look at the look of, on the face of Christ, that sense of, Father, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? That sense of desolation. Also, you see an old, you can't see it so well here because of the shadows, but this is his mother, Christ's mother, and over here is Mary Magdalene. And you can't see it so well, but Mary Magdalene is only half face. Because of course there is talk that Mary Magdalene was originally a woman of the night, and so you don't see her full face, whereas you see his mother full face. But nevertheless, as I said, is a beautiful piece of funerary architecture. And you get a sense of the backdrop to the cemetery, with, of course, the Black Mountain in the backdrop there. Christian Brothers came to Belfast in the 1860s. They have 2 plots in the cemetery. There are many, many religious orders in the cemetery. And the Christian Brothers, one of the first orders to come to Belfast, of course, their first school was St Patrick's in Donegal Street. and then of course they had a school in just at the Queen's Bridge. They had a school then in Divis Street, you know, so this is one of the first congregations of brothers to come to Belfast. What I show, this is a small burial ground at St Dominic's on the Falls Road. When it is Dominican nuns. They came to Belfast in 1870. Originally they had a number of graves in the cemetery, but then when they got their extra land where their school is today at St Dominic's, and then between St Dominic's and St Mary's Training College or St Mary's University College, they opened a small burial ground, and it is still there to this day. And there are over 100 nuns buried in that small burial ground. It's beautiful. Most people don't even know it exists to travel up the Falls Road. I did a plan of the cemetery, and you can see the graves. This is the very first. She was buried in the Milltown, but then reinterred when they opened their small burial ground. This is the Sisters of Charity of St Vincent de Paul, and you can see again, these headstones have been, these are new headstones, or a new face put on an old stone. So there are many, you can see the history of Belfast, religious orders, Catholic orders, by their burial stones in Milltown Cemetery. These are the Redemptists of Connors, and again the first stones are only from about the 1970s, and that took me down to Connors Monastery, and this is the crypt underneath the high altar of Connors Monastery, and there are about 40 members of that community buried under the high altar. So in every sense, as I sometimes go sideways, you get a bit of information. And you can see in the early burials up here, you can see they're all priests, and over here they're brothers. So there's a bit of hierarchy going on even below the high altar. So this is, of course, I think the joy of a burial ground. In some sense, you have to allow the narrative to lead you in the direction that I didn't expect to be doing maps and plans of other burial grounds or other burial sites as a result of looking at the cemetery. This is what I call priest row. Now, in the old Catholic tradition, most stones face east, because that's, of course, the second coming. Christ will rise in the east. But for Catholic priests, they're buried facing the west. And this is a classic example of it. This is the stones. There's about 30 or 40 graves here, and each one of them, you've got bishops and monsignors and senior clergy. But in fact, if you look along this row, this is a history of the Catholic Church, particularly since partition. And I often say, in terms of the Catholic community, the two great institutions that survived partition was one, of course, the Catholic Church, which ended up as a state within a state, in my view, and the other is probably the GAA. But here you can see them. These men would have been representative of a clergy that came through partition right into the growth of the Catholic Church into the 1960s and 1970s. And you can see that in their schools and in their institutions. And they would have spearheaded that growth. But of course, modernity and scandal have had its enormous impact. But here they look out on the Falls Road, and I call it Priest Row because there's just a solid line in them. This is Bishop Henry Henry, and his is cruciform tomb, I suppose in the shape of a church. And here there's tablets on each side of this tomb, and they represent the instruments of torture of Christ. You know, the 5 instruments of his torture, and you can see them here, here and on the front and on the other side. He's probably well known for trying to start the Belfast. He did start the Belfast Catholic Association, and it was a way of the Catholic Church trying to get Catholics a political representation. Odd enough, it was opposed by wee Joe Devlin, and only lasted a short time. But this was the Catholic Church organising itself politically in Belfast. But as I said, it was opposed by Joe Devlin. So this is the grave of a priest. Here you see the stole and the beret here. These graves here, like a banner, there's about 11 of them in the cemetery, and they came from a stonemason called O'Neill, who had a premises in Divis Street. And when it was sold to a man called Macaulay, the use of that type of banner ended. Here again you see a chalice. So you often see a chalice and grapes, which signifies that it is the grave of a priest. This is Father O'Toole, an Irish speaker from the Ravenhill Road in Belfast. And you can see, again you see the stole and the chalice. This is medieval Irish here, along the rim of his tomb. And on the other side is the Cross of Calm, a very good example of it, on the other side of his tomb. He was preaching in St Malachy's in Alfred Street, and he must have had a heart attack and collapsed and died in the pulpit as he was preaching. Here you can see his sfonia, which is an indication that he was an Irish speaker, and he was a native Irish speaker, and he learnt his Irish from a woman called Mara O'Neill from the Glens of Antrim, who was a native Irish speaker. Again, as I said, you can see the stone there. So a beautiful headstone. These are the Poor Clares. Poor Clares used to have a convent on the Cliftonville Road, but then their members were, declined, and they had to close their convent. And inside their convent was a small burial ground. So in 2012, they all but one were reinterred in Milltown Cemetery, and these are their headstones. This is Francis Davis, the Belfast man, and why he's called the Belfast man? He's a young Irelander, and he was the librarian at Queen's College, came north, and he probably represents the earliest of the Republican graves in the Milltown Cemetery. And look what it says: in memory of Francis Davis, Ireland's weaver poet. Now, of course, the weaver poets come from the Presbyterian tradition in the north of Ireland. But here he wrote a lot of poetry, and he calls himself the Belfast man to distinguish him from Thomas Davis, another very famous young Irelander. And look what it says: with the soul of a loving and frivolous knight, whose instinct is genius, whose language is light, a child of the people had builded a name, and the weaver has woven a garment of fame. So this is the earliest of the Republican graves, and it also tells you the story of that in this city, that there has been a Republican community since, of course, the United Irishmen were founded here in Belfast. You had Young Irelanders, you had Fenians, right through to 1916, and right through to the present day, that there's been a continuous Republican community in the city, and he is a reminder. Also, I suppose, he's a reminder of, an international side, because Young Ireland, there was Young Germany, there was Young France. It was a movement of the 1840s. So he makes all these, I think, political collections. This is William Harbison. And William Harbison was a military Fenian, and he was interned in Crumlin Road Jail in 1867. and he died as a result of an aneurysm. And one of the biggest funerals. This stone was raised by a man called Johnson of the North, who had been a Fenian. And he raised this stone. Now, it says in the Republican literature that it was raised in 1912, but I found out that the plot wasn't bought until 1913. Johnson of the North, he was a businessman, he was a builder, and I found a really odd connection in Thomas Gallagher, the Tobacco King, Johnson of the North, who remained a Republican all his life, loaned Gallagher £1,000 when he opened his business in Belfast. So you see some odd. Business, of course, transcends politics. That's the point. And I'll come to this stone in a few minutes' time, but this is I suppose, the oldest Republican plot in the cemetery, and it was bombed 3 times, bombed twice in Divis Street, and bombed once in Milltown Cemetery in the 1930s. Of course, Joe Devlin, first Nationalist MP for Belfast, and in a sense I think his legacy, I suppose, came right up through to Jerry Fitt. You know, most people would see West Belfast today as a Republican area, but in fact Joe, he was a Hibernian, he was a member of the Hibs, as it was called, on Falls Road, and had great support, and was I think a much loved political representative on the Falls Road, and a very dynamic figure, and very much in touch with his political community. This is William Barrett. You see all the connections. In 1907 there was a very famous strike in Belfast by dockers, and as a part of that strike, the RIC, or elements of the RIC, mutinied in Belfast, and the mutiny was led by William Barrett, who on the 1st of August of 1907 was pushed out of the RIC, and then he opened a pub on the Grattan Road. But again, his grave is a reminder of a very dynamic and short period in the history of the working class in this city, because it was really a very big strike. But what is forgotten about it, that a year before, in 1906, 25,000 women who worked in the mills came out on strike. And I suspect that was really a signal for the strike that followed a year after. And we know a lot about 1907, but there isn't much to be told in terms of research about 1906. It was really a big, massive strike of mill workers in this city. Winifred Carney. Winifred was born in Bangor, but came and lived in Belfast on Carlisle Circus. She was a member of the Gaelic League, a suffragist, and a trade unionist. And she started her own trade union, the garment workers, for women in the mills. Through her trade union activity, she got to know a man called James Connolly and became Connolly's secretary. And in 1913, with Connolly, she participated in the Great Lockout and strike activity in Dublin. But we would know her today as one of the few women to walk into the GPO on Easter Monday 1916 with a typewriter under her arm, along with people like Sean McDermott, who she would have known from Belfast, James Connolly, and Padraig Pearse. So she was one of the first to be in, and she was one of the last to leave the GPO at Easter in 1916. She was interned and jailed a number of times. But then there's a great love story, because she met a man, also a Labour man, called George McBride. And George had been in the British Army, was captured by the Germans, and was a prisoner of war. But the two of them, because of their similar politics, their socialist politics, they were married. And George is buried outside Bangor today, but there's a good photograph of him. This is a stone under the care of the National Graves Association. And there's a great photograph of George at the headstone. He was very proud of his wife. So this is Winifred Carney, I think one of the great women of that period. Sometimes you come across a stone. Look at this. This is a stone about 12 inches high. And it has two sisters and one brother. So Henry Corr was an Irish volunteer, and his two sisters joined Cumnaman in Belfast in 1914. When the Cumnaman were mobilised, the only unit of Cumnaman in the north of Ireland to be mobilised in 1916 were the Belfast Cumnaman. And they travelled to Coal Island, and then when the countermanding order had come from McNeill, they, instead of going back to Belfast, they actually went to Dublin and met Connolly, and the Corr sisters brought the proclamation in their hats to Belfast. So, but this story has a twist to it, because two of the brothers of the Corr sisters, one was joined the Canadian Army, and another the Australian Army, and one died on the Western Front. And I suspect that they joined the Canadian because they didn't want to join the British Army. So they went off to fight, one with Canada and one with the Australians. And one of the brothers was killed on the Western Front. And it seems to me that again and again, when you look at the narrative of people's lives, that this stone reflects the complexity of our history. You know, history doesn't run along parallel lines, and it's quite complex. And crisscrosses, and there is no them in us. And this story, if you think of 1916 and the Easter Rising and a brother down on the sun, that is our history. And yet this is another part of the history. So this, look at this. Joseph Walsh, who was martyred for his faith, 1st of April 1922, aged 32 years. Also martyred his nephew, Robert James Walsh, who died on the 2nd of April 1922, aged 8 months. And his son, Michael James, died 4th of April 1922, aged 7.5 months. There was an incident at Brown Square on the Shankill Road. A shot was fired, and later, that night after the shot was fired, specials raided a number of houses. This was in Orange Street, which sits between the Old Lodge Road and Crumlin Road, and they shut up a number of houses. So what happened with Joseph Walsh? Joseph Walsh had been a First World War soldier, served with the 10th Irish Division. So they raided the house and sledgehammered their way into the house, and then they sledgehammered Joseph Walsh and killed him by sledgehammering him, and then they shot 3 children. 6 others, I think, were killed that night. And so when the wife of Joseph Walsh went to complain to Brown Square, she went over to identify the specials concerned. Of course, they weren't there, but when she came out, there was a mob waiting on her, and she was beat up. So this is another element of our hard history. And she then sent his medals back. He had received a number of medals for his sojourn in the First World War. So this really tells you, this is really on the cusp of partition. And I often say in the city cemetery you see a very outward, confident, dynamic unionism. Oddly, in Milltown, you begin to see something else. This is Sergeant Christy Clark. I looked for this grave for years, and I'll tell you why. There was a Republican called Sean Gaynor who lived on the Springfield Road. And in 1920, September 1920, he was shot dead by a squad of RIC operating out of Springfield Road. And one of that squad was Sergeant Christy Clark. He was a Catholic, and he lived on the Springfield Road. And 2 years later, Sergeant Christy Clark was shot by the IRA at Mulholland Terrace on the Falls Road. And he's buried along with other RIC personnel at the time in the cemetery. But I really found it very difficult to find it because his grave seemed to be high honoured because it's covered with bushes and trees. But then I discovered that about 11 graves directly in front of Sergeant Christy Clark's grave is the grave of Sean Gaynor. So when you can look at Sean Gaynor's grave, you can see where Sergeant Christy Clark is buried. It's as if they're connected in life and they're connected in death. Well, the straight line, it's very, very odd. And also what I came across are a number of graves in Milltown belonging to the RIC who were shot in Belfast at the time. There is no marker over the grave. Of course, I believe there should be a marker of some sort, but there's no marker to say that they're buried not too far from Sergeant Christy Clark. So, what I want to talk about, this again is the Harbison Monument. This is Joe McKelvey, born in Stewartstown, County Tyrone, where his mother ran the post office there, and his father was an RIC sergeant in Springfield Road Barracks. And in 1914, the sergeant enlisted in the British Army. But Joe McKelvey was a very senior IRA man in the 1920s. In 1922, he was in the Four Courts, and at the surrender of the Four Courts, he was arrested. And as you can see, is it December 8th of December 1922, there was 4 senior Republicans judicially executed by the new state. And Joe McKelvey was one of them. He was he led in the grounds of Mountjoy Jail until 1924, when his remains were brought to Milltown Cemetery. And the man who gave his oration was Sean Lamass, who later, of course, became Taoiseach. So, this is his son, Joe McKelvey, very senior IRA man. This is the father in a British war grave. This is Patrick McKelvey, and he's buried about 100 yards from his son. So, in a British war grave. And I think we must be, Milltown must be the only cemetery where you have the son in a memorial plot to IRA and the father in a British war grave. It really tells you about the type of society. The other thing I found about Patrick, when I was looking at his death and looking at his birth, there was a 5-year discrepancy. So what was the discrepancy? I think the discrepancy was he enlisted in the British Army. He's probably too old for it, so he brought his age down by 5 years to get enlisted, and that age carried through to his death. So you get all these odd things. A cross of sacrifice. We have 2 on the Falls Road, one in the city cemetery and the other in Milltown. And this, when they started burials of First World War soldiers from about 1950 on, oddly enough, they were buried in poor ground. So in Milltown, if your family was in Belfast, you'd be buried in a family grave. But otherwise, you'd be buried in poor ground. And there's over 40 soldiers and sailors buried in the poor ground in Milltown Cemetery. And this stone, it has their names, see on the plaques here, it has their names of those who are buried throughout the cemetery. This is the a memorial or ground. This is soldiers from the Belgian army, yes, buried at the bottom of the cemetery, and they have all been lifted. But today there are a number of Polish graves of Polish airmen buried in the cemetery there, and this is from the 1940s, and these were Belgian soldiers. A Blitz plot. So, over 1,000 people died in the Blitz in Belfast. They don't know how many, because of course many disappeared, vaporised. So they had to decide who would go into the city and who would go into the town. These were unidentified remains. And so if you had a medal on you, or Catholic, you know, then you went into Milltown. If nothing, you went into the city cemetery. In the city cemetery, There's also a very big plot of unidentified Blitz dead. This is at the very bottom of the cemetery. This is Marcus Bobbington. You can see he was a lieutenant colonel in the Royal Army Medical Corps. Now the Bobbingtons are a family from Derry. You ever hear of Judge Bobbington? A big unionist family. His parents, his father would have signed the Covenant and his mother would have signed the Declaration. He was a doctor, a First World War soldier, and he's buried in Milltown Cemetery. So at some point he has become a Catholic, and he's buried there. If you notice this stone, see the lip here? This is an indication. A normal Commonwealth headstone is round at the top. This indicates that this stone is under the care of the Ministry of Defence. There's one or two in the cemetery, but that's what it indicates, that they are under the care of the Ministry of Defence. This is a very rare stone in Milltown. It's Fred McGrady from St James's, who in the 1950s went to the United States and joined the American Air Force. And it says Staff Sergeant for 179th Tactical Fighter Wing, 831st Air Division. And he died young of cancer, and his remains were brought. So this, I don't know that such stones exist in other cemeteries, but this is the only stone. This is a formal American veteran's headstone, and as I said, it's the only one that I could find in either Milltown or indeed the City Cemetery. This is a amalgamated Transport and General Workers Union, 11th 10th branch. Now, it originally started off as the 11th 10th branch of the Transport and General Workers Union. In the 1920s, the Transport and General Workers Union is an Irish union and was started by Connolly and Larkin. But later on in Britain, the trade union there wanted to put in, also use the name Transport and General Workers Union, and the Irish union objected. So they then put amalgamated onto Transport and General Workers Union. This is a dockers union in Belfast. James Moore Neely Hunter, he's very lonely. As far as I know, and I could be corrected, he's the only Protestant buried in Milltown. And that was because, of course, he married a Catholic. And he died before she died, so he was buried in Milltown. But also, I think he has the distinction of the only person in Milltown who signed the solemn legal covenant. You never quite know what you find in a cemetery. This is a man called Martin Hutchinson. It's the first, he's a parish up here left, John Hutchinson. And it's, you can see this is the first headstone, and it's, you know, March is 1871. Now, with the Irish, you get a few stones right through to 1920. They then increase slightly, but it's actually from the 1940s that you see Irish becoming more prevalent on the headstones of Milltown. And the first headstone in Irish in the City Cemetery is 1872, and it's the headstone of a Royal Naval Captain. Here's a classic example. I'm not so sure when this stone, as you can see, 1957, so it might have been put up much later. This is George Washington, a music teacher, and in 1857 he came to Belfast to teach music in the school in what we know today, I used to know it's in Congo, it's a model school in Divis Street. And that school was burnt out in the 1920s because it was being used as a base for British soldiers at the time. Then the wall and the school was knocked down and St Congal's was built. But this is, he lived in Ann Street and he died young. He's buried here. This is an architect. Let me see his name. Timothy Healy, sorry. This is the man who designed the gate of Milltown Cemetery and also designed the Ormer Park. And his small and very, very weathered stone, he's buried here in Milltown Cemetery. This is a man called Francis McAleenan, and he was a stonemason. He used to own a premises at the corner of the White Rock Road and the Falls Road. But in the 1930s, he helped build, you know, the statue of St. Patrick at Saul? It's called Slieve Patrick today, but originally it was called Slieve William. And he helped build that statue. There's a few of his funerary pieces of architecture throughout the cemetery. This is Cathal O'Byrne. He really tested my sense of research. His sister was born in Cumber, and his father is down as a coachman. There's a piece on Cathal that says that he was buried in, he was born in South Down and then moved to Belfast. And they lived on the Lisburn and Upper Malone area. Whereas in fact what happened is the family ended up in the Lower Lisburn Road and then in Leeson Street. But of course, Cathal O'Byrne, he wrote a very series of articles for the Irish News, and that became a book, you know, as I wrote out. This is him, and it says, you know, he was an Irish speaker. I get a sense of someone who reinvents himself. I also get a sense, I suspect that he was gay. And there's a story that when he died, he lived in Kennedy Street on the Falls Road, he lived with his sister, that when he died, the family just asked someone to come along and take all his papers. So we have very little of his work, you know, his actual handwriting and whatever. I suspect, I wondered, did they know he was gay and they were burning, made sure all of his papers were burned, given the atmosphere and the attitudes of the day. He was a very good friend of Francis Bigger, and was a part of the clique that would have been a part of Ardree, where the house of Francis Joseph Bigger. He would have been close, I think, to the RB in Belfast. And in 1920, he went on a tour of the United States to raise money for the White Cross, and that was a fund for the Catholics of Belfast who had lost their houses in the political upheaval of that time. So there's a street in Beachmount called Montgomery Street, which he would have raised money for. And Montgomery means the American Committee for Relief in Ireland. So this is Cathal O'Byrne. One of Carl Gilbert Hardyback, this is the stone to his wife. Carl Gilbert Hardyback came to Belfast and opened a music shop which went bankrupt, and then he became an organist and ended up as an organist in St. Peter's. He really, he met Mary, his wife, and she was a Gaelic leader, and I suspect she was also a Republican, because when she was buried, Connolly was there, and other, Denny McCulloch, well-known Belfast Republicans. And what she did, I think, is introduce Carl Gilbert Hardyback to Irish culture. And he became one of the great collectors of Irish music at the end of the 19th century, right into the 20th century. And he was an organist at St. Peter's, the Pro-Cathedral, or the cathedral on the Falls Road. And he married 3 times. Another one of his wives is buried about 10 yards from this grave. But in some senses, I think that many people in Belfast have lost sight of Carl Gilbert Hardyback and his contribution to Irish music. There was a priest in St. Peter's, Father Charles Newlis, who wrote the lyrics of The Foggy Jew, you know that Republican song about 1916? And we think Carl Gilbert Hardyback wrote the music for that song. So he was a Republican and a nationalist. This is Frank McFadden, lived off Springfield Avenue. Anyone knows about Irish music and the making of uilleann pipes? Frank made the uilleann pipes. But he used to say on the 11th July every year, all the pipers who were in the Orange Parade the following day would come across and get their reeds fixed and tuned. So he made uilleann pipes. This is Padraig Woods. Padraig was a painter. And the way I use Padraig's life is, at the end of the 19th century, what you begin to see, there is a very big intellectual core to Belfast. You see it in the Philosophical Society, the Botanic Gardens, in the museum, in the Lynn Hall Library, in the Literary Society, and numerous other societies. And for the most part, they would have come from the mercantile elite of the Protestant community of Belfast. But what you then begin to see is as the influx of Catholics into Belfast, they start to throw up their painters and their different artists. And so they begin to merge around, and I think Padraig is one of that merge, and that very dynamic community, which in some senses disappears after the First World War, and I think partition. This is Gerard Dillon. Gerard lived on in Lower Cannon Street, and his painting is described as, I suppose, primitive, although he was saying about €60,000 today for one of his paintings. J.G. Devlin, you of course must know him as one of the McHughs. Born in Clonard, and of course worked in Mackey's during the First World War, 2 long plays there, and then became a full-time actor. As you can see, an Irish speaker. Of course, we remember him for his part in Over the Bridge. He was a friend of Sam Thompson, you know, the playwright from East Belfast, and we would have seen him in many television programmes in the 1970s and 80s. And this is Elizabeth Bagley, whose father was an RIC man who was stationed in Belfast, and in 1907 was sent to Portlaoise. And she came back to Belfast and lived off the Falls Road. And again, I think she was one of the McHughs. So this is this photograph here. This is Bagley, this is J.D. Dillon. These are really, this is a very dynamic set of actors and people associated with theatre in Belfast. Beautiful photograph. Anybody know who this is? You've all seen him. You all know him. This is Darby O'Gill. This is Albert Sharp. Albert Sharp was, you would say he was raised in vaudeville, became an actor. And in the film about Darby O'Gill, he is Darby O'Gill. There's, you've got all sorts of actors buried in Milltown. This is a GA man called Maguire. Look at the hurry box. See them? At the bottom of a stone. Actually, there are better examples of Irish stone crosses in the city cemetery than you have here in Milltown. Of course, Charles Patrick Tully played for Belfast Celtic and then Glasgow Celtic, and played for Northern Ireland. And there's a great story about him that in one of his matches he was asked to take the corner, and he scored directly from the corner. And because the referee thought it couldn't be done, they asked him to take it again, and he scored again. Johnny Codwell, you all know the boxer, world champion. He's buried there. These are people we don't see, the short stringers and the burners. So in the 19th century, mid-half of the 19th century, you get a number of German families coming to Belfast. And what are they? They're clockmakers. And of course I think they're coming for making clocks for the shipyards. And then they opened jewellery business. And so we don't ever think about the contribution of those who arrive in our city. And this is another man, Pio Matassa, arrived in 1911, had a shop on the Grosvenor Road, and then moved to York Street. The Italians in Belfast, many of them came to work on the new churches being built. And they all come from an area just outside Naples, a lot of them from the same region, so they all know one another. But I think this is a beautiful stone. Look at that face, you know, and that moustache. Beautiful, isn't it? This is Mühlenmeister, came from Belgium. This is the organist at Clonard Monastery. And look at, you see the organ pipes? You see here? The organ of Clonard has a very strong connection with Belgium and Belgian organist. So what I show you this mark for, this is poor ground. So you can see here, 1887, then, yeah. So this poor ground here was the poor ground where the dead of the Spanish lady were buried. And there's a Bishop Tolan buried here. And they said he got himself buried there so that when they blessed his grave, they had to bless the poor ground, because of course in the Catholic tradition again, this was unblessed ground, because there would be thousands of babies buried here, thousands of them are buried here. And this, not a stone to mark who's buried there, but there's thousands of people. This is the bottom end, this is the poor ground. As you can see, this is these are Polish airmen. This is a car park over a burial ground. This is what was sold to the Ulster Wildlife Trust, but which is now back with the cemetery. Another car park here. And that's why I always like to end with the poor, because they're meant to be out of sight and out of mind. We're not meant to find out their stories, or they're meant to be anonymous. And I think we have to ensure that they're not. Now, I'll take a few questions. The other thing is, I brought along two of my books, Balmoral and Milltown. They sell for about £13 each, but if anyone wants a signed copy, I'll sell them for a tenner today. Now I'm going to say this one's nearly out of print. This one is just on the cusp of being out of print. So you could be very lucky and get one of the last copies. Any questions? Thank you very much. Yes.